Welcome back, Marianne. So this time we are going to talk about your re-election, and you're the Select Board Chair actually this year. And how long have you been on the Select Board?
So this is my 10th year of service on the Select Board. I've served 3 terms and then 1 year after Jerry Wasserman passed away. So, and I had something over 9 years on the school committee ahead of that. So it's been almost 2 decades for the town.
Right. And can you talk about some of the initiatives and projects that you have been involved in that you are proud of as a Select Board member?
Over the years, I think there's any number of things that I'm proud of. Even though people don't love it, I think of all the time I spent on the large house committee trying to figure out how those various dimensional things could be adjusted. I think of work that I've been doing recently in the area of climate on the Climate Action Committee and how critical that will be to our success going forward in meeting the requirements from the state for a carbon neutral future. And I think particularly during the pandemic about all the work with the town that we did with our merchants and being out first on outdoor dining and things like that. You know, one of the criticisms I think of Needham often is that we're not the first at many things. Outdoor dining, we were like way out ahead of other people, really talking to our merchants in town about what they needed and listening to what people in town needed when we put in small grant programs and things like that. So I'm very pleased with that work.
I saw it on your website, you said that if elected, this will be your last term.
It will be my last term. I actually hadn't planned to run this time. When my current colleagues thought about it, you know, everybody was kind of caught. All of a sudden you're realizing, oh, everybody could be new. So I really think it's a great thing for Needham to have a generational shift and a bunch of new leaders. I think that's wonderful. At this point, I am looking forward to running one more time and to working with them to be sure that they all feel really ready and have the history behind different things and talking about what the background is on all the topics so that they can go forward and also educate and mentor new people who come to the board after me.
What will be your priorities for this term?
I'm going to go back and mention one that I didn't talk about in terms of work I was proud of as being work that continues to be a priority, and that's the work with Nuwari, the Needham Unites Against Racism initiative. The Nuwari group, again, worked during the pandemic, a group that didn't know each other, talking about a really sensitive topic. That's work that I'm really proud of in terms of the principles that we laid out. But there are a number of things that Nuwari expects to have happen, right? That work really needs to be inculcated and developed in town so that it becomes a natural part of our response to things. So being sure that everyone feels welcome, being sure that we are constantly thinking about and reaching out to engage all of our citizens, both in the government and in the town, ways that make that happen. That's going to continue to be a focus. The upcoming work also will be around climate, which I mentioned already, where we'll continue to roll out a series of steps. Probably each year there'll be some new initiatives that need to happen around climate. And then I've been talking a lot about transportation. Transportation and housing to me are quite related. We don't live in a town that kind of naturally supports increasing the density of our housing. And we do have, I get it, we do have the commuter rail that comes, right? But the timing of it isn't always perfect, and we're certainly all still working on the quiet zone, and that would make life more livable for everybody who's along the spine in town. But we need to get our transportation and our housing in sync. So those are going to be areas of focus as well.
Mm-hmm. Talking about transportation, what specifically is the concern about transportation in Needham?
Well, certainly if you talk to people who live in Needham, they will tell you that they worry that there's too much traffic. It's still a challenge because most people are out in their cars. We will be thinking about how do we get better options that are not car-based, right? How can we make it easier for people to get around town, maybe through some, shared electric shuttle, through some other transportation means that don't require each of us getting out, getting in our car, requiring a parking space, all those kinds of things. And I think that there will be increased options that we'll be able to offer to Needham over the next several years, being sure the biking lanes are clear in places where we can support them. So we've been talking, with the DPW about how we start to create biking lanes in a different way automatically. And I think as more of those things come in, people will start to think about how they plan their day maybe a little bit differently.
Right. Okay. You also mentioned housing, and the Select Board and Planning Board just passed the housing plan for Needham. There are a lot of unmet housing needs and recommendations that are outlined in this plan. What do you think is the most pressing unmet housing needs in Needham?
I am actually quite grateful to the MBTA Communities Act that was passed by the state, because we had already met our 10% under sort of the prior 40B kind of rules that were out there by the state. The MBTA Communities Act gives us an opportunity to once again rethink how we are considering housing in our community and what we can do to support access to more housing. What we know is that regionally there's a challenge. There's not enough housing regionally. The fact that there's not enough housing regionally is part of what drives the prices up for everybody. Certainly I've benefited for that as a homeowner, somebody who bought a house 30 years ago in town. But that doesn't, the idea that middle class folks, that younger families, that they can't come in and access a house, right? Let alone people who have income at lower levels than that. There needs to be more options. So I am really happy that we're going to be going through MBTA communities, that we've already mapped out some areas of town that we will be then discussing about whether they can be finalized in a plan. And the fact that we will create those options by right will start to expand the housing options that we have in town. It's going to take more planful work to create these less expensive housing options. I'm hoping that there will be a couple places in town where the Select Board will be able to work with some housing developers to develop housing that is more moderately priced. We are doing work with the Needham Housing Authority, of course, to redo their housing stock and create more of it with more density. So there's several prongs to the Needham approach, and I do expect that we'll make progress over the next 10 years, like we made progress over the last 10 years.
Great. And talking about the Climate Action Plan Committee you just mentioned, what are some of the actions that the Climate Action Plan Committee have made? What are some of the next steps?
There is initially one step that was recommended, okay, and that step was the community electrical aggregation. So the work to bring that to Needham, which means that the town would contract for electricity for all the citizens and businesses of the town. And people would be able to opt out from that, but there would be presumably a benefit to our buying electricity collectively rather than each of us in our own homes buying electricity. So that's the first step. So that was recommended. It went to town meeting, was also supported by town meeting. There's now a working group that's working to bring a proposal to the town for what that will look like. So over the next year, that piece will roll out. The other thing that the group has asked for that we're going to be trying to figure out how to fund over the next year, probably through some grant funding initially, will be a sustainability coordinator or somebody who can be in that role. There's work to be done in terms of understanding what grants might be possible for the town to have access to. There's also work to be done working with citizens of the town. So if they are in an existing house and they have a boiler fail or they have an air conditioner fail, many times the recommendation would be, just replace it with something that's exactly like it used to be. But in fact, we think there's an opportunity to help educate people that there are in fact other alternatives that are viable now. And so we're thinking about, is there a role that can really be focused on education and be a resource that people in town can call and talk to when they need to make those decisions for their house? So that's important current work. Over the course of the next 6 months, they've just opened bids and are interviewing right now people to work with us to develop a specific plan. All right, so we had various working groups in a bunch of different areas. Now we have somebody coming in to actually craft a plan and lay out specific next steps. So when we talk a year from now, I'll have a bunch of next steps beyond those two.
One of the big program and projects that's coming up in the town is to build and renovating those 3 school buildings. And you also talk about it, how you want to continue find ways to fund these projects on your website. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Would love to talk about that. Thank you. Needham has always worked to be responsible in terms of how we schedule our projects and how we plan for them from a budgetary perspective. The schools are trying to figure out which project comes first, which project comes second. One of the participants in that, we don't completely control that destiny, is we've asked the Mass School Building Authority, or we will be asking the Mass School Building Authority to participate in making that decision with us. And we're hoping that they will, and that they will help us to pay for, right, the first school that we do. And then we'll have to take on that question again with whatever becomes the next school. So whether it's Pollard or Mitchell, how High Rock fits into that mix or doesn't fit into that mix are all questions that will need to be resolved. But the town is planning that those schools do need to be rebuilt, and they need to be started soon. So I think we've delayed for a couple of years while we were trying to look through the financing options, understand what they looked like. But at this point, it's time to go to the state and say, we really would welcome your participation in helping us to think through this and helping us to get this job done.
I think lots of people, folks in town right now, talk about how these 3 school building projects that might require the town to raise its debt ceilings. Are there any specific strategies that you would propose to bring additional sources of revenue and help with cost savings?
I'm not sure that there are huge sources of cost savings because I don't think the town is going to stop doing certain functions. If anything, we see that the citizenry is asking for more services rather than fewer, right? But figuring out how we're going to pay for something is an important part of the job. And one of the things that in my time on the select board that I've worked quite hard on is being sure that we continue to build up the business side of our balance sheet in addition to the residential value of the balance sheet. So projects like the new project that's going on with Bullfinch at Muzzy, our anticipation is that the new taxes that will come to the town from the Bullfinch project, the lab project that's going in there, that those would be dollars that we could hold and allocate to help pay for the school projects. In doing that, we will not need to raise taxes to the greatest degree that we might have to otherwise. So we're hoping that that can offset the need to ask for an increase in taxes. We're still expecting that the debt will be something that we need to think carefully about, right? And if you listen to debt policies, we talk about this overall 10%, that 10% of the town annual budget could be allocated toward debt. And that's not a hard and fast line. It's kind of a soft target. And there's an intent that we stay within that 10%. I'm not advocating that we raise it in any permanent way. I don't think that's in the town's best interest based on what I know right now. So I would like to keep the target. I do think we'll have some period of time where we will exceed it to pay for the schools. But I also know that projects like the Bullfinch project will help significantly.
Now I want to talk about a little bit about yourself outside of your involvement in town governance. Tell people, especially new folks in town, who is Marianne Cooley and what do you do?
I've lived in Needham since I got married in 1986. We have 2 children who both grew up in Needham, went through Needham Public Schools, graduated, went off to college, graduated. One's in New York and one's in Nashville with her family and our granddaughter. So neither of our children are still here, but my husband and I are still here in our home where they grew up. And throughout that period, I've been involved in various organizations in town. So I started with involvement in the schools once my daughter started in school. I've been involved with the hospital since the early 90s, including at one point being the president of the hospital aide and then serving on the board of advisors and the board of trustees. And now I've termed off that and I'm back on the board of advisors. So continuing to support the hospital in town. And then serving with just a variety of other volunteer roles. At one point, I was co-president of the PTC at Pollard. At another point, I was co-president of the Needham Education Foundation. My son, when he was little, even after I had termed off the NEF board because I had chaired the spelling bee, every year for the next 3 years, he still insisted that we go and do setup for the spelling bee, even though I was no longer even on that board. So, but it was just part of his life as he started, from the time he was 3, we went and we spent a day, or an afternoon getting all ready for the spelling bee. It was a big deal in our lives to do that. So we've been blessed with doing that. I'm a parishioner at St. Joseph Parish. I taught CCD there for a number of years, and I'm still active there. I worked as a consultant for most of the time while my daughter was growing up. She had some learning issues, and so I wanted to be available for her. Once she got off to college, I realized I could do different things and had to figure out what I was going to do next. So at that point in 2009, I went back to work for Wellesley College, and Wellesley is my alma mater. I'm the secretary of the board there, and then I do a variety of other special projects, whatever the president wants done. So that's my day job. I'm still working there.
What do you think sets you apart from the other candidates?
I think the biggest thing that sets me apart from the other candidates really at this point is experience. I think bringing that experience and the experience that I have of just being able to, sit down with one of my colleagues and say, okay, these are the following 5 things that happened when we looked at this before. This is what citizens start by being concerned about. This is how we might want to think about, possibilities for going forward. Because really, part of why I do what I do is government is about the art of making things possible, right? And it's really been a gift to serve the town of Needham in a way that says, you can listen to everything the citizens want and figure out how to make those things possible, to make all of our lives the way that we'd like them to be.
Thank you again so much for coming and talking to me today.
Thank you, Shao.
And I wish you good luck on your re-election.
Thank you.